best piece of information. Like it's going to be this eureka moment for people when they're, taking in all this information. But I really think that it comes down to that small ripple that will equate to so much more. And it's uncomfortable because even for myself, I'm like having these really impactful conversations, and engagement on social media is not what it is. But like every single person I speak to is like, I've been really enjoying it. I've been really liking it. And I'm like, it really goes back to like that word of mouth is like the strongest form of marketing.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you've ever heard that story about, it's a like Peruvian story about a hummingbird. And it's the little hummingbird is like bringing one drop of water and putting it on a forest fire.
Uh,
And all the animals are like, why are you doing it? And it's like, well, it all will equate to something. It's better to try. And so I think that's like where I think a lot of us are lying is we want to help. We want to see impact, but it feels like you can't really measure it and you don't really know where it's going. So it can feel quite daunting,
mhm.
but it does.
Yeah. I think if you just focus on the impact that is happening rather than the impact you want to happen, that's the shift, right? Instead
Hmm.
like I need it to be this way or I need this much engagement in order to have that impact feel real. It's just if you have that capacity to zoom in and zoom out, you know where you want to go, but you release or surrender that how and just focus back in on that present moment, being aware of who it is you are in contact with, how that energy is in exchange, and ultimately what is actually happening in the now. If you stay anchored in that, I find there's so much peace of mind. And
Hmm.
when we come back to those one on one conversations and the smaller communal collaborations, it's just like you just have this peace of mind, like, yeah, things are going to be okay. It's not until we zoom way out and put this pressure on what we think things should be or how they should emerge or unfold. That's where that distortion lies, right? When we get so future
Hmm.
focused on how it should be rather than just accepting how it is and where you're at and really, I think, reveling in that moment.
Yeah, I've been really trying to like sit with the feeling. And I guess I've always naturally like tried to digest a thought in breaking it down into, what is this belief system and how can I like adjust it? But that takes space and that takes just honestly time.
Yeah, my motto is deal with what emerges and not a moment sooner.
Hmm.
Not to like perpetuate procrastination or avoidance, but I think again, it just comes back to being present, and presence in this day and age is rare. And it's with such a overstimulating information overload normalization in our society with social media, with television, with that like productivity being the priority, then we can lose sight of being present in the moment and the gifts that that gives. So just to have that ability to come back with the breath, sit with the emotion, feel that energetic quality of where it is that you're at, and then also lean into the energy of who it is you're becoming. I think then the how starts to fall away and it just starts to happen.
Being that, now we're in 2026, I think everyone can acknowledge that our phone consumption and access to social media and content and stimulation. Is there any practices that you have in place for yourself to kind of check back in, to disconnect, to regulate your nervous system?
Yeah, I have lots. I mean, I think just my AM and PM rituals are something I've really worked to dial in on over the last 5 or 6 years. And the consistency of them is not the most important thing. Like, I have to do this, and this every single day in order to
Mhm.
feel regulated. It's more like these are the things that I aim to do in order to feel regulated. And it might be a little bit different every single day. So having that acceptance that the routine isn't rigid, but a little bit flexible. It gives you grace, right? And that in itself is very regulating for the nervous system. So, like waking up and not looking at a phone. Like I get outside and walk my dog after I make my bed. And that's like a routine that I've built in and just get outside in nature. I don't bring my phone with me. And I do those 2 mindfulness walks with my dog every single day, once in the morning and once before bed. I find that's really regulating for me, just a very simple mindfulness walk, no technology, just in nature. And I find that's actually where my best ideas come to me.
Yeah, you
Uh,
get the downloads.
yeah. And then, meditation, breath work, you mix those in throughout the day. Journaling is like a non-negotiable for me. I protect my mornings like my life depends on it. My slow mornings, like walk my dog, make my bed, do a little laundry, have my coffee, spend just some time journaling. I don't use an alarm clock.
Mm,
That's actually like a really interesting Japanese health kind of habit that they have in their culture is to not wake up to an alarm clock and jump
mhm.
out of bed straight away, to actually just like lay and integrate for a couple of minutes because that actually can lead to stroke, which is really fascinating. I saw that recently and I'm like, okay, I'm glad I've already got that habit going.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not surprised. I recently saw some information surface as well, where before Isaac Newton introduced the light bulb, people would sleep 11 hours a night, and before the alarm clock, they like even the information that had surfaced that I was listening to was talking as if the alarm clock was almost like a siren. And what
mhm.
it does to spike the cortisol and kind of jolt you up, it's not really natural for us to experience. So it's
No.
just creating like a stress response right when you wake up, let alone picking up your phone and looking at like notifications right away.
Yeah, and the flickering lights and all of that stuff is just like not good for your circadian rhythm. So that being said, like on occasion I might check an email upon waking and be like, I gotta get myself into this again. So
Yeah.
like so human and it is a challenge. But for the most part, I do my best to leave my phone out of the bedroom. I don't have any like I
Yeah.
don't have TVs in my bedroom. Like it's for sleep, right? And yeah, last year I played around with getting rid of television entirely. And I had one of the most transformational, most like I've never accomplished so much in my entire life and felt like I had so much time. Like it freed up so much time in my life not having television. So after I got all of these things done last year, I let it back into my life over Christmas. And I was just
Yeah.
like, it felt like such a time suck. I was just like, wow, this is really fascinating. So again, I've deleted the
Yeah.
subscriptions and I'm like, I'm just
Yeah.
go back to like that habit of reading in the evenings and just it does it free if you feel like time is endless when you're
Mhm.
not sucked into those dopamine traps, right? And your nervous system isn't being hijacked by stories that aren't yours, right? Like we watch all of these shows and they elicit all of these emotions, but your nervous system can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not, right?
Yes.
So you take a lot in that maybe just isn't productive for you.
Mhm.
So I feel so much more spacious when I don't have television in my life. So that is something that I enjoy. I got a brick. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's like a physical thing. It's like a magnet you put on your fridge and you can lock yourself out of your apps and you need to physically tap it in order to unlock this stuff. So I played around a little bit with it last year, but I think the um, software was a bit janky at that time. Sometimes
Yeah.
it would like lock me out of my maps randomly, and I'm like, oh, I actually need that to keep
Totally.
going. I'm gonna try it again. I think they've done some up
Yeah.
to their software, but I
Yeah.
use that so I don't use social media scrolling.
Mhm. And I'll totally admit it's so interesting how like and I think I don't know, it's very interesting to observe human behavior because it seems like it's always something, whether it was like alcohol, like emerging into our culture and us building a relationship with it and understanding like the fun aspect of it, but also the cons. And then how cigarettes like got so immersed in our culture. And then now we're realizing how damaging they can be and how much obviously its production and everything that's filled into it has impacted us. And now we've come to this point where it's like we're all addicted to this and it's so difficult. I'll even admit for myself to create new habits that we literally need to use apps or devices to lock us out to rewire and stop the pattern.
Yeah. I think probably moving forward in these upcoming years, that pattern recognition is going to be a really valuable skill set, but also the ability to interrupt those patterns, right? And to create new ones. So, yeah, I find having certain tools to help you do that is very beneficial. But the more we lean back towards nature, I feel the more restorative and regenerative it is.
Mhm.
So, yeah, for me, it's just like spending time in nature, eating holistic, nourishing foods, being consistent with self care, whether it's acupuncture or seeing my specialists. And yeah, I think also just sleep quality, like protecting your sleep is number one. Just making sure you're going to bed at a similar time in the evenings, getting those specific hours that you need, and just understanding what quality sleep is and isn't. I think lots of people have this misunderstanding that, you have to sleep a full 8 hours, not wake up or anything. That's actually just like the exception, not the rule. It's quite normal to wake up a couple of times throughout the evening. And, as long as you can fall back asleep within 2 to 3 to 5 minutes, and that's fairly normal. So, and I find like not using devices to track every single thing is also a part of my well being, because having all of these different apps and everything monitor every single system. It's just like, yeah, that data might be helpful, but like the way that that data is being extracted isn't.
Totally. Well, that was the other thing that came to mind too when you said nature, because it's really the frequency and like what it's emitting that has an impact on us. They say that like even our, our dishwasher, our refrigerator like emits a frequency, let alone our Wi-Fi, our TV, everything. So
Mhm.
like when we're out in nature, we're getting those negative ions, we're earthing, we're grounding ourselves. And as much as that sounds very like hippie to some people, it actually, there's science-based evidence of how that regulates us. And so I agree. I've been finding, I mean, so many women now are like, yeah, like, track your hormones and your cycle, get an aura ring. And I'm very resistant to it. I actually got rid of my Apple Watch just because I don't need the constant, well, I
Yeah.
don't want the radiation touching my wrist,
Yeah.
but yeah, to I don't want that constant trigger to want to look at my phone and keep me once again in that loop pattern.
Addictive, because then it's, and again, you're no longer feeling into it, you're overthinking into it. And that's like, I think I mentioned this to you when we were chatting at Unleashed, where I was like, I think one of the biggest addictions that society is facing right now is overthinking.
Yeah.
We're obsessed with thinking about every single piece of data and analyzing it to the point where it's just like, are you even living your life anymore? Like, we're human beings, we're meant to feel. Like,
Mhm.
so for me, I'm like, again, it comes back to that deal with what emerges when it emerges. Not to say you should ignore data points and certain, health flags that are coming up, but if you practice these very like holistic things just in general, then that becomes redundant. You don't even really need to do those other things, right? So it's when you're avoiding or ignoring all of these other patterns that are causing issues that have you needing to track all of that information. Just to simplify all of your processes is a really important component of well-being.
I always think too when people are like, I'm, new year, new me, and I'm gonna, change my whole workout routine and I'm gonna diet, but it really just comes down to the lifestyle. So
Yeah.
like how can you make those small changes and how can it culminate into something where like you can create less stress within your life, you can actually connect to yourself. You actually can like take the time to digest your thoughts after a day and find peace and calm in one form or another if you can take that time.
Yeah. Yeah, and resolutions are so ass backwards. I would say the majority of the population is really hardwired to function in a way that isn't in alignment with how their mind actually works. So oftentimes people are spinning their tires trying to change the habit rather than changing the identity first, right? Like we need to adopt a new identity and mentally rehearse that in a relaxed state in order to change habits, right? So, and change doesn't happen drastically, rapidly. Like it does and it doesn't, right? Like when we decide to change, it's in an instant. But the actual, uh, let's say, like alignment of taking action happens gradually. And it's usually the thing that goes the fastest is taking like 2% changes on a daily basis, like just very small incremental changes that align with who it is that you've decided you want to be. Right. So instead of being like, I'm going to change my diet, work out every single day, and I'm going to do this thing, setting a resolution, like you're going to fail because you're taking this huge chunk and trying to digest it all at once, right?
Yeah.
And the body, the nervous system just won't regulate to that, right? So whereas if you change your mindset and just say like, this is who I am, these are the things that I enjoy doing, and you mentally rehearse yourself and see yourself doing those things, then you just naturally do it without exhausting your conscious mind, right? Because what you resist persists. And if you try to strong arm your subconscious mind with your conscious mind, it makes the resistance to the subconscious mind even greater.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
fascinating.
And they make it becomes a mountain instead of, let's say you have these big goals and then you get right on track, like right out the get-go, and then life happens. You get sick or, all of a sudden your schedule has to be adjusted and then you feel completely, kind of run down or maybe discouraged and having to just kind of get back on track with those like micro steps once again, I find is like the easiest way so that you're not so hard on yourself thinking that everything needs to happen at once.
Yeah. It's a really fascinating subconscious bias. Like it has to be, it's like that black or white thinking, the all or nothing thinking. And if I fail once, that means I might as well give up. I see that with my clients all the time when it comes to habit change. And it's just like, no, like you can maybe fail one day and choose not to the next day. Like it doesn't have to mean that it's a complete failure and you're just gonna
Mhm.
go back to what you were doing before. But again, that pattern doesn't get interrupted until you adopt the new identity first. So it's really about finding all of that default thinking and reprogramming it first so that you can actually create those consistent changes without, again, exhausting the critical thinking mind because it fatigues so fast. And that's a subconscious bias, that black or white thinking, that all or nothing thinking, because it's easier to just give up and go back to the default. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a protective mechanism, but there's a secondary gain. So until
Mhm.
you cover that secondary gain, the subconscious mind is just going to keep repeating that program.
Mhm. And so I trust that you have, a breath work and meditation probably that you've acquired over time, probably from your own personal practice
Yeah,
to achieve
I think
this.
it's interesting for me. I find all of the practices that I've established now was because that I chose it as a career path, and the fastest way to learn something and adopt it is to teach it. So it's served me in that way. All of these practices I've learned and adopted because I was fascinated by it and I taught it. So it made it like second nature for me. And so I'm grateful for my healing journey, forcing me to take on these practices because ultimately it led to a healthier, happier lifestyle.
Mhm.
So, but the getting there wasn't so easy, right? I came to these practices through trauma, through illness, through challenging experiences. And that I think that's the silver lining is just like a lot of people try to avoid that challenge and discomfort and pain. But when you look back on it, it's often the thing that liberates you the most, that frees you the most, that fulfills you the most. So
Sometimes it's baptism through fire. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I keep having this same conversation with so many people where, there's a lot of things that it can't always be taught. It needs to be experienced. And sometimes through those difficult circumstances, you're able to really integrate that wisdom through your own trial and error within yourself to find, what the root of that is or what actually can like reverse that.
Mhm.
And I can totally admit too, like my 20s, I wanted to be where I'm at right now. And I'm very grateful. And although there are challenges and, you kind of anticipate things to kind of feel differently than they are, you have this anticipation, but it's definitely been a process and a level of patience that you need to have with yourself as you kind of work through your own barriers and your personal level of consciousness to kind of break through.
Yeah, I have a lot of clients or people who know about what I do for work that know of somebody that they want to send to me. And I'm like, okay, well, they have to want it though, right? You can't want something for someone else. Like, I'm not in the business of fixing people, right? Which is interesting because as a therapist, you think that is what you're supposed to do, but it's actually not. It's just like you're just here to facilitate, to guide, to shine a light on a blind spot, that maybe someone else can't see, and and ultimately it's up to that person to live out their karma, their dharma, to have those challenges, to go through that suffering because that's meant for them to build them into who they are becoming. Hindsight is 20, right? Like that clarity doesn't come until after you take that action.
Mhm.
I often get clients coming to me seeking clarity and I'm like, okay, take the action.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I believe that too. And I can totally admit I used to have kind of a mentality of like, well, you like hire a psychologist to work with you and they should be able to like extract everything, but it really comes to your own level of commitment as well. And it's true, you can't like knock on a door and expect someone to open up the door if they're not willing to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you can only help the willing. That is, I think, as like working in any kind of healing modality, that's just an important anchor um, to ground with.
yeah. I think a big part of my journey is I had to recognize within myself where I was a common denominator, but I also had to get curious about my own suffering in order to really have that self awareness piece and make those changes, or at least be receptive to what it could be.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest part of what I want to do with my work moving forward is really educating on that subconscious literacy piece, right? Because our ego will prevent us from wanting to look at those areas that we're avoiding or, we're blind to as a way to protect the identity that we currently have simply because it's familiar. And the way that the ego does that, it will defend, it will project, it'll criticize, it'll judge, it'll attack, right? In order to preserve itself. And the goal is not to get rid of the ego, but it's to integrate it, right? And to have the courage to look at where that suffering is coming from and where you can hold yourself accountable for your part in it. And I think, again, like coming back to that ability to observe the ego in real time and to have that ability, metacognition, to choose rather than react. And I think for so long, hypnotherapy has been like cast into this self-help realm and only for the elite. I think the psychological shift that we need to take as a collective for the greater good of humanity is to take on the work of understanding how the subconscious mind actually works as early as we learn arithmetic and language, because that's truly the kernel of all other systems of operation. Until we have a firm understanding of how that works, we're destined to repeat the same mistakes of the past: war, poverty,
Hmm.
generational conditioning that isn't helpful, societal conditioning that limits people. And I look at so many systems that are running on these are running through these like inefficient ways, whether it's the taxation system, the healthcare system, the government, right? Like there's so many inefficiencies. And I'm like, these are all just massive blind spots because we're not taught how to understand the subconscious mind.
Mhm.
We have the ability to look at that and educate on it. It could make just like such a profound shift. So I
Mhm.
think right now in my life, it's just like building the skill set to articulate that. And this is like, again, that patience piece. Like you can't rush who you're becoming, but like you just, that's where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting that, it feels like the collective, we focus so heavily on the external. And, the more that I work with mentors and even just hearing you say it, it really comes to the work internally within ourselves. And I
Hmm.
think a big thing that I've learned, and coming from, religious background and through my spiritual journey, I've really come to terms that, the ego is a byproduct of our existence and it is a part of what got us here. To live in the, I, me, yes, survival is important, but understanding as a collective, we need to move past that and start to think about more of like, how can we control, I guess, ourselves without it having such a, I guess, a ripple effect in the sense that like it's just amplified so much outwardly in such a negative manifestation. I mean, so many times I have conversations with people of like, how much money do you need to make to be happy? And based on data, like 10 years ago, it was $80,000 a year. And now, based on inflation, it's about 140. And so, like, let's say you had all the money that you needed and all the resources, it's like, what more do you need? And, if you had the ability to really sit with yourself and do the work and heal and reflect back on your family lineage and really kind of do the work, how different our world would be.
Totally. And not only that, like there's such a huge amount of isolation in our society right now that actually takes away from our ability to live in these smaller collectives that are more conducive for how human nature even exists and thrives and evolves. So again, it's just like if we understood the mechanisms behind why that isolation is occurring, why that inflation is happening. Like I took a program on offering a high ticket offer with this like really famous coach. I won't name her name, but so I took this program and I was just like, as a clinical hypnotherapist, I was like, wow, all of these methods are chock full of psychological manipulation. Like this is not good. And then one of the coaches in the program was talking about, like, oh well, taxes are they're taking about 51%. And it's just like you want to obviously pay that and respect the government and blah blah blah. I'm like, why are we accepting that level of taxation when the services provided aren't proportionate to what we're paying. Like, why are we all just blindly accepting that? A, problem number one. Two, earning more money in order to and charging more, like inflating your prices extraneously just because you can use these persuasion tactics doesn't make that the solution to that problem. That just
Hmm.
increases the problem. Where now these services are only available to people who can pay these insane prices. And no one's talking about why the tax system is broken in the first place and keeping people oppressed and limited. like and there's
Hmm.
all of these inefficiencies in how that money is being spent,
Yeah.
whereas if we had that understanding and that ability to know when our emotions are being manipulated in order to buy more, sell more, like do all of these things that are happening in our economy in this consumeristic society on a global scale that are causing so much pollution in our environment, like it's ongoing. And it's just like when you have that ability to come back and be like, oh, I can see that this is a persuasion technique to get me to buy more. And you can come out of that emotional response and come back to logic. The way you look at systems entirely is very revealing. And you're like, oh, my goodness, this system here is actually operating in a way that isn't just, isn't serving. And you can just see it so much more clearly. And I think if society at scale had that ability to discern in that way, we would have a vastly different society that would be a lot more supportive.
Absolutely. I've been contemplating a lot on like the use of marketing and how it triggers an emotional response, and how, living simply over the last hundreds of years of our existence, we literally just had to focus on our basic needs.
Mhm.
And I do, I feel like we are in the midst of a recession. I do understand the job market is more plentiful, being that there's more job availability for women. When we track back, typically you could live on, one male income for like a household. But now it seems like everyone needs to be making X amount in order to survive. And so when I think about, a recession and then, perpetual debt, and I think about the level of consumption and access to the consumption to whatever we have, there's definitely an addiction to that, or an emotional response that's getting people to not even realize the pattern of impulse of like moving past what they actually need.
Yeah, and this is the theory behind subconscious literacy that I'm working to educate on, right? Like the taxation system, like we aren't educated on financial literacy in school because they use fear to perpetuate um, this avoidance, right? And only the people who understand the taxation system, who have financial literacy, who have moved through that level of avoidance and fear, are the ones that really benefit from that knowledge. But there's a reason why it isn't taught, right? And same thing with the healthcare system. People aren't taught how to keep their body healthy from a young age because the healthcare system profits off of people being sick. Same
Yep.
thing, like it just goes on and
Yep.
on and on, and it all comes back to that subconscious understanding because we're all being driven by these low level operations and emotions of fear, shame, anxiety, right? They're all being targeted and manipulated for you to buy more, get in
Mhm.
debt, stay trapped in that fear and avoidance cycle in addiction. It's fascinating to watch it unfold.
Mhm.
It's fascinating to see it in your own life, whether it's the overuse of your phone or this like need to post more to feel relevant or validated, or just like all of these things. And it's just like we do need a collective pause to stop and just filter it back down and come back to that
Mhm.
understanding. And I think
I keep thinking about that too, almost like a collective detox.
yeah. I think, and it's like that 80-20 rule, right? If you spend 80% of your time focusing in on your energy, then that 20% of action that's going to take you the furthest and create the most impact in what it is you're trying to do or where it is you're trying to go or who you're trying to become, it just becomes so much more clear. And that path is becomes the path of least resistance. But there's like this collective situation where people are just spinning their tires because they don't have that understanding of how the subconscious mind works, how it's being used against them. And I feel like it's just such an
Mhm.
important conversation to be having right now.
And once again, being rewarded for the hustle, for being driven, which leads to perpetual burnout, which typically, at least for myself, when I've been burnt out, I'm just trying to recover and I don't even really know how it started and how it kind of ended. And then you kind of just, you can't really identify. It's like you're just trying to recoup.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's a systemic. I have so many new moms come to me because they want to prioritize themselves. And I'm like, this is not a you problem. This is a systems problem. Like, if you don't have the systems in place to support you to have the time to even prioritize yourself, this is not you being at fault, right? It's just like, we just don't have the systems in place to give the people the support that they need. But the reason why we don't have those systems in place is because people are blind to the fact that the systems we currently have aren't working or
yeah,
have an understanding of why that is or what to do, right? So
yeah,
people just
yeah.
shut down. It's like when you say, I can't or I don't know, the subconscious is like, okay, let's just
hmm
power off, right? And then you stop looking for solutions. Same thing with burnout. You just don't have the energy to look for those solutions because you do just need to regenerate and repair.
And it's interesting as you were touching on how the beginning of this year you've been really taking downtime and conserving your energy. And I've been doing the same thing. And it's really allowed me to look at my patterns to see, like, I do work really well in preserving my peace, like you said, your morning ritual, your evening ritual, but also too, like, it's like I forgot how important my downtime was. I got
Mhm.
stuck in such a long extended pattern, 8 years of like working, 2 full-time jobs, and let alone, I will totally admit a big thing that I'm navigating right now is post COVID. Still a lot of like my routines and all these different things that I did, i.e., hot yoga. And now push myself to like go back and start those practices again. It's harder. It's more difficult than ever for myself. So I can only imagine it's probably very similar for a lot of people. It completely, so many of these abrupt changes that have happened collectively, it's hard to revert back because it's been so, our patterns have been broken so much.
Sorry, I just have to plug my computer in because my battery is dying. 1 second.
No worries. Yeah. I'm going to turn this to,
Yeah, and the thing I find so fascinating post COVID is that, not to be like a conspiracy theorist, but of course, in a
everything's
way,
welcome.
it was like a psychological warfare. What happened
Yeah.
and how that impacted the global psyche was so fascinating that the amount of repair necessary just to return back to that homeostasis, that baseline of normal functioning or functional functioning, um,
Mhm.
taking a drastic amount of time to
Yeah.
repair that. And I think, again, without that level of subconscious literacy, it takes even longer to repair that, right?
Yeah.
Because we get
It
these.
was, yeah, I was just gonna say, it really felt like a war between people. Even when it came to families, disconnecting from each other based on, personal belief. And for me, it felt all too familiar, coming from leaving a very religious upbringing and having to deal with that kind of segregation from family, that it was very interesting for me to observe from afar. But that stimulation in itself, that knowing that people were constantly at odds at each other and how we all kind of, I truly think that it really amplified the use of our phones and almost going into a state of illusion, you
And
know,
forcing people into isolation to normalize it. Huge
Mhm.
problem. Huge problem. And the repetition of the messaging that human beings were subjected to. This is what hypnosis is and what it's not, right? So hypnosis is synonymous with deep relaxation. But what is mind control is the use of repetition to basically train the mind. The mind learns through repetition, right? So when someone is exposed to a repeated message over and over and over again, it creates a neural pathway, right? So when you think about how that repetition was used in isolation in a heightened emotion, it creates damage to the
Yep.
brain, to the psyche. But alternatively, in order to repair that, it's the same process, except that we use something that's helpful, truthful, and kind, rather than something that is
Mhm.
terrifying, using negative emotions against you and forcing you into um, these qualities or states of being that are very detrimental to human well-being. Collective social creatures. We're meant to connect. So to have that forced isolation, to have those repetitive, fearful messaging, just that bombardment of isolation and divisiveness amongst people. It's not something that you just bounce back from. It's a collective trauma. I think, again, the way to repair that is the same process, but just using positive emotions, relaxed states of attention and connection, coming back
Mhm.
wholeness rather than severing ourselves from it.
That reminds me so much. So a big thing from like my experience post COVID, volunteering overseas, coming back and listening to just very randomly a psychologist that was talking about how dopamine hits, synthetic dopamine hits from our phone, disconnect us from our frontal cortex. And so we actually lose our bandwidth for empathy. And I
Mhm.
have this theory, and I'm doing my own personal research, and I want to formulate like a presentation and a concept of how we can rebuild our empathy through connection, through eye contact, facial, expressions. Because truly, I think that like by us constantly looking down, not looking up, looking at our phones, being isolated, yeah, just getting these dopamine hits and not actually feeling these real emotions. We need to do these in like micro scales to try to just get back on track. Cause I do feel like we feel it on a soul level as well.
Yeah, I think that's why a big part of my work, I so enjoy having in-person events, and I don't do them in person and online. I only do them in person because that online state, it disrupts the frequency and the coherence in the group. And I think having those small containers and those one-on-one conversations with humans in person, it supercharges your empathy and compassion, and it brings you back to this communal coherence that is actually incredibly impactful when it comes to creating change that you want in the world. So again, it's those micro steps, that 2% change, that return to some form of nature. And I think for the bigger picture, it's just making it a habit, right? And allowing yourself to be bored. Like
Yeah.
that is where genius lives. Like if you can stare at a wall for 2 hours and really meet yourself, really allow yourself to sit with that energy that exists within you, in your soul, in your body, in your mind, and just let it be. What emerges from that simplicity is just pure gold. It's a gold
Mhm,
mine to be bored.
mhm.
Back in the day, I think I dated somebody who complained about being bored all the time because just weren't in love with their job. And I was
Yeah.
like, what do you have to be bored about? I'm like, life is so exciting.
Yeah.
There's so much going on. But now I'm like, I just cherish
Yeah.
boredom.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's such a gift, depending on the context and the nuance, obviously.
Yeah. But you nail it. You nail it so well because that was exactly part of the video. And this, therapist, this registered therapist, he says that boredom is a natural emotion on the spectrum. And it is so healthy for a teenager to be sad, bored, and doesn't know what to do because it actually is part of your brain's power cycle.
Yeah.
You are meant to complete that. You're meant to experience it. That lull in between is necessary because it can also be a state of wonder. What if as well?
You wonder why anxiety rates are through the roof and it's the number one mental health disorder. It's because there's no rest. There is no boredom. It's just a bombardment of overstimulation, and the nervous system doesn't have time to decompress, right? So I find that there's this really fascinating hierarchy in our society, or this like maybe unspoken kind of conceptualization of how emotions should be felt. And it's like bad emotions are negative emotions are bad and positive emotions are good. And there's like this whole realm of positivity psychology that emerged around the 90s, right? And is really uncommon in Europe. Right? People really value struggle and challenge. But in our Western civilization, there's like this need to just be hyper positive all the time. Otherwise, there's something wrong with you. There's like a
Mhm.
pathologizing of negative emotions. And it's just like, no, that the emotional spectrum is meant to be felt, all of it. None of it is good or bad, right? When you have the ability to understand, feel, and process and transmute those negative emotions, that's what opens up your mind rather than spiraling it down and shutting it down.
Mm.
But if we don't normalize it being okay to feel those negative emotions, then that is where the collective psyche gets stuck. It's where we get stuck in fear, hatred. Again, this is what stems the belief of I'm not enough, where we lose potential. Poverty stems from that. War stems from that. Hatred, like inaction stems from that fear, right? So we get these people just stalling out, society's stalling out, not evolving, right? Because we're not
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah, yeah. I just think about when I was a teenager, awkward teenager, didn't know how to do my makeup, didn't know how to do my hair, and didn't feel like I fit in no matter what circle I was in. And I feel like what individual doesn't ever experience that at least once in their life? And it is part of the greater picture of you need that contrast as well in order to feel the greatest sense of joy. And I
Absolutely.
think that's what people forget as well. You can't always be up. You can't always be happy. You need to be able to feel both in order to appreciate both sides.
Yeah, I find, there's like this blanket statement that people will say just because they're conditioned to generationally or society, like, well, I just want to be happy. Like, what do you want in life? Well, I want to be happy. Well, there's so much more to life than just being happy. If you were happy all the time, you might look like an insane person. You don't want to be happy at a funeral. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? What we want is to feel that entire spectrum of emotions and to really embrace every single individual emotion. But what isn't taught is that our emotions only last about 90 seconds. So it's just like,
Yeah.
it's actually safer to feel them than it is to repress or suppress them. And we're so conditioned on a societal level, on a global level, to suppress emotion, to normalize war, to normalize fear mongering, to normalize that. It's just like, that's actually what's not suppressing and repressing emotions is the least normal thing a human could do. The most
Mhm.
normal thing a human could do is to express themselves
Exactly.
fully, authentically. But a lot of that comes back to the Industrial Revolution, the patriarchy, how psychology was even formed during that time period. It was so from that lens. So I think integrating more of that understanding, that feminine knowledge, I think is really important right now. And not to say it should be a matriarchy or a patriarchy. I think we need to come back to that yin and yang, like you said, that
Yeah.
contrast, the light and the dark, like they're both equally
Yeah.
important.
And a space for it. Yeah. Because I think it's so interesting how we're seeing, increased rates of mental health related stuff in whatever direction it goes. And it really does come from it has taken a life of its own because of the suppression. A big thing that I had to learn for myself is I always had a very shameful relationship with anger. So it was always something that was suppressed for me. And I've actually given myself permission. It's such a strange concept to me because I'd always just like put my needs aside, and so the anger would always be brushed to the side. And now I'm actually sitting with it and I'm actually feeling empowered that I'm like, wow, that's my internal justice system. Now I don't need to blow my lid and be eruptive and project it in a negative way, but to at least acknowledge to be like, why is my internal justice system kicking in? Why does this frustrate me? Why does this make me angry? Like, it's crazy to me. And I do believe that there's so many different people that experience the same thing where they've literally minimized that one specific emotion because they've assumed that it's negative.
And this comes from, you think about the early myths, Stoicism and the birth of psychology. We had all of these very prominent, intelligent men forming these schools of thought and, coming up with diagnoses like hysteria for women. And it became like it was normal for women to learn how to suppress their emotions because it made people uncomfortable because that was just the school of thought and it's stuck around for so long to the point where now this mass majority of women are coming up with these autoimmune disorders because of the
Mhm.
suppressed anger and the boundary violations that have existed through generation after generation, right? So it's again, I think now more than ever, it's so important to learn how to express that and to not repress it. And there's one of my favorite, I think it's a Buddhist proverb, but it says, when we express our anger without a filter, it'll blow up in our face. And when we repress our anger, it'll manifest in the body as illness. But when
Mhm.
we can express our anger with a filter, then it starts to dissolve. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it goes for every single emotion and it comes back to boundaries again. Right. And I think for a while, we were really seeing a lot of pop psychology, social media around boundaries, upholding boundaries, right? And it was all in an external way. Like, I won't let this in, right? We're not letting these kinds of things happen to us. So we're saying no. But boundaries are also what parts of self you let out. For example, there was someone coming to the clinic the other day and they were having some trouble with the app around parking and it really got them frustrated and they were almost like in a stressful panic and then lashed out at the front desk. And put this person at the front desk kind of into an anxiety attack. And I was just like watching this unfold, and I'm like, yeah, these boundaries are not so much about what you let in, but also what parts of you let out. It's like containment, that discernment. Because you're having a stressful moment doesn't mean you need to project it onto other people. And again, I think that it just always comes back full circle to me to the subconscious literacy. Like when you can recognize that happening in real time, you can practice that filtration system, what you let in and what you let out. And
Mhm.
that exercise of upholding boundaries becomes internal and external.
Yeah. And I just keep thinking too of like there's a level of strength that comes from being able to be conscious of the emotion but not having a negative effect on other people because it does create a ripple effect and it does people do absorb it.
Yeah, and again, that negativity, not to say that it's a bad thing, but it spirals the mind down. It shuts people down. It puts them into that nervous system reactive state of freeze, fawn, fight or flight, right? So if everyone in society had this capacity to regulate their nervous system, feel and process their emotions in real time and to observe their ego and its protective mechanisms and choose how to respond simultaneously, that process of metacognition, like how different would our society be?
Mm-hmm.
Like the level
Yeah.
of self-led individuals, solution forward thinking, um, the collaboration that we would be able to achieve if we weren't, butting heads, butting egos. It's
Mhm.
fascinating to think about, and it gives me hope for the future because I know
Me
it's
too.
possible.
Yeah. Another thing that pops up for me that I find so fascinating is we have all this information and all this scientific data that pretty much backs all of history's intuition. And the power of intuition, I think it's something that is very underappreciated in this day and age, especially in like a larger society, a larger community, like city community. So much data is coming out where people are saying logic is the most important thing. Yes, like being able to, maybe have a bird's eye view and maybe not have a reactive emotional response, but also like really being able to connect with yourself to understand that like on a somatic level, your health and your well-being and checking in with yourself is very important. And just being able to, yeah, not need everything externally and knowing that all the answers are within yourself.
Yeah, and I think that a big part of it is that separation from our mind and body, right? And you see all of these different mental health pathologies that are floating around now, and it separates you from your body, but your body and your mind are not different entities. They're a whole unit. So for me, it's about treating the mind, body, and soul synchronously. I don't know if that's a word.
And now is. I love it.
Just treating it as a whole, right? Like, I think we've spent so much time separating those pieces and treating them individually. My question now is how do we treat spirituality, embodiment, and logic together, right? Because that
Mhm.
awareness piece alone doesn't create action potential. So we need, for me, it always comes back to that practice of hypnosis where we're really utilizing our mind to feel into our bodies, feeling all of those emotions. And again, just rehearsing the future vision that we want to see in the world. And I think when we come back, and this is like a skip forward to even 2027, I think the fire that's forging this path that we're on this year is it's clearing the path, all of the faulty systems that aren't working. It's letting that burn away so that we can come back to this values based work in our society. So I think this year, if you can connect back to what you value and let that guide you through this fire, what's going to happen on the other end of it can be really powerful.
Yeah, I keep going back to connecting back to our heart space because it might sound like a cliche, but there's so much that's out now about the what we emit from our heart space, which is our passion, our values, like what keeps us going. And if we are mainly living in our head, we do need to go back to that. We are not living fundamentally in the right place that's going to sustain us.
And how do we come back to coherence, right? It's connection with one on one and small groups, right? Because we can't see our own blind spots. We're blind to our own blindness. But you can see mine, I can see yours. So when we have
Mhm.
that dialogue, when we have that connection, when we come into that coherence, all of a sudden the field opens up, right? So it's just like more of this.
Mhm.
And that's how we
Mhm.
get into alignment, the coherence with our values. And that's where the shift starts to happen. That momentum really begins to speed up.
Yeah. Wonderful. And so is there anything that you want to share this year of anything that you're working on?
Ooh. Yeah. So I'm applying for a TED Talk. The application's February 1st. So
Amazing.
with the University of Alberta. So I'm going to apply for it. So the topics on regeneration and coming back to truth and reestablishing trust in the medical system. And it's about like neuroscience and biotech. And I'm like, oh, this is perfect. I've never felt like more in alignment to talk
Yeah.
about the work that I'm doing. So fingers crossed.
Yeah. You know what's so crazy is as we were talking, I was thinking about once we got offline, I was going to send it to you because I also applied. Yeah. And I have one more that's in my back pocket as well that I'll send you the info for because I feel like you have to, especially considering the theme for that U Alberta one. Isn't it rejuvenated?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Or renewed Ted. And it really does come back to, and it's not necessarily so, but in some ways, like once again, as we're talking about like intuition and we're talking about like tapping in, it's almost like we're having to reverse engineer, just go back to the root again and
Mhm.
have people remember of how things were.
And that's a big part of intuition too. I don't think like intuition comes from past experience, right? You have that pattern recognition. So it'll direct your body, your nervous system will direct you through remembering. And for me, I think intuition isn't just in this lifetime. We remember things from a quantum field. And when you have that ability to tap into that remembrance, your intuition is like tenfold.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that is coming up. And then I've got some articles that I'm publishing for a magazine, which I'm really excited about this year, and just working on my clinical practice, just continuing that and putting together a program around subconscious literacy and emotional intelligence and utilizing rapid transformational therapy as the tool to create that metacognition. So that's what's coming up for me this year, which is really exciting
Incredible.
and the book that I'm writing. So it's lots.
Oh, I'm so happy for you. And I don't doubt. I think that's the other thing too that I'm feeling a lot with this energy and what's coming in this year is it's like a lot of building blocks
Mhm.
and having to just stay like not talking yourself out of it, building those patterns and just seeing it build brick by brick with the small steps to see this bigger picture. And I don't doubt a year from now that you'll have so much to share in your achievements.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. That's the deep rest period, the integration period. I'm like harnessing the energy to go after that this year.
Yeah, I feel that for you. But thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.